Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Welcome to episode 11 of Check Your Thread. I hope you're doing well. My goodness, it suddenly got very chilly where I live. I've been scrabbling around trying to remember exactly what it is that I wear in colder weather. So my selection of colder weather clothing isn't great, and most of it is not very exciting, which doesn't really help my mood this time of year. So this week I've been making a sweatshirt that I am very excited about. It's using a pattern that I was given for promotional purposes from a new-to-me pattern designer from Russia called Kate Sewing Patterns. The pattern I chose is a very clever twist on a traditional raglan sweatshirt style, and it's got these awesome sleeves that kind of balloon out at the bottom. I'm using some grid print organic cotton sweatshirt fleece and some organic cotton ribbing that I bought earlier this year from Fabric Godmother. So I'm hoping that this new sweatshirt will inject some excitement into my clothing options whilst also being really wearable. I haven't finished it yet, so I'll have to let you know. Sustainability-wise, I can say that I executed the fairly waste-free and fairly plastic-free birthday celebrations for my kids as best that I could. There were some plastic-wrapped lollipops and a disposable piñata and some other stuff that I'm not super proud of buying, but I think that the whole thing was a pretty good compromise all in all. I'm also looking into getting one of those organic fruit and veg delivery boxes, which should help cut down the amount of plastic waste, plus make sure that we're eating more organic veg than I usually buy. Over on the Check Your Thread Patreon this week, we have one lovely new patron. Thank you so much, Jackie, for signing up to support the podcast each month. If you would like to support the podcast and feel that you are able, please find the link on checkyourthread.com. So on to this week's episode. So now that the number of podcast episodes has hit double figures, I feel it's time to occasionally discuss topics that are adjacent to, rather than directly linked to, the theme of sewing more sustainably. In today's solo episode, I'm taking the definition of sustainability in a different direction from the usual environmental meaning, and I'm talking about how to sustain your sewing life when you're a parent, particularly of younger kids. It's a topic I've written about in the past, and I still feel really passionate about it. And this episode is basically all the points that I eventually figured out for myself, but I wish I'd heard when I first became a parent. So I've realised that to create a podcast that has a feed full of interesting, inspiring and entertaining episodes, I've got to let go of the idea that every episode will be for every listener. And of course, this particular episode will most likely not be for everyone. However, I do hope that you'll give it your ears even if the topic isn't directly relevant to you. There's a lot in this that would apply to anyone who's suddenly become busier or has been landed with new responsibilities. Maybe you're starting a different kind of caring role, or have landed a new, more intense job, or perhaps you're starting some studies on top of everything else in your life. There are many causes that can lead us to get lost or deprioritised in life. And although this particular episode is about parenthood and includes a few points specific to that situation, I think it works more broadly also. So I really hope you enjoy having a listen. And if you can think of any other points that you think would benefit somebody in this situation, please let me know. And then we can maybe do a follow-up episode at some point. Enjoy! So I taught sewing and dressmaking classes for about a decade up until the first lockdown last year. The different establishments that I worked in tended to have different demographics of the people attending, but I often had the pleasure of teaching people who were in their 50s and older. Some of them were returning to sewing after many years, as well as some who were discovering it for the first time, now that they had a bit more time on their hands. I always like to start a sewing class by having a chat to break the ice and to find out about the person so I can tailor the teaching to their needs. So I often start by asking everyone about their sewing background or why they chose to sign up to the class. A very common thing that I would hear is that they'd enjoyed sewing or other creative passions when they were younger, then they'd had kids and or a busy career, and their creative outlets fell by the wayside. Often it was 2 or more decades later, when their families or their jobs no longer took up so much of their time and brain space, that they finally found the opportunity to be creative again. Hearing this common storyline used to make me feel really sad, because I was at the very stage of life that they had been in when they'd let go of their making. And I was right in the eye of the storm, parenting very young children. And I felt that never had I needed sewing in my life more than I did right then. And just the thought of giving up sewing at that point led me to feel real panic. To be clear, the older sewing class attendees that I'm talking about right now were all women, and traditionally the role of caring for young children, or at least the juggling of childcare and paid work, has been and continues to usually be the preserve of women, often by default rather than by choice. But I 100% acknowledge that men and non-binary people can also be very much affected by the pressures of parenting and other responsibilities. So I'll be using gender non-specific language in this episode. Plus, I want to fully acknowledge at the top of this that there are many different ways that families are formed, not just by a heterosexual couple in which the female gets pregnant and gives birth. So parenting. Maybe I've been making more of a meal of it than most people, or I've been extremely fortunate in other areas of my life so far, but I've never found anything in my life more challenging or disorientating than becoming a parent. My kids just turned 8 and 5 last weekend, and I still regularly balk at the realities and responsibilities of it all, 8 years into the role. But if you were someone that enjoyed creativity and making before you became a parent, whoever you are becoming after the arrival of children, it's incredibly likely that you'll still need those kinds of outlets going forward. As we've heard, it's a common tale to hear of those outlets slipping away from us until much later in life. But why does it happen? And how can we prevent ourselves from losing what we enjoy? Obviously, I can't speak for everyone, but for me, parental guilt instantly became a major feature of the new parent version of Zoe. Partly, my newly adopted parental guilt was a response to societal pressures, but I'd say that a lot of it was self-created, or at least perpetuated by myself. So that's the bit that I think that we can tackle. So children, particularly very small helpless ones, are of course your absolute priority. And for the first few months it feels like there will never be space, time or energy for anything else in your life ever again. But after that initial extremely intense chunk of early babyhood, I felt guilty for doing anything that wasn't in direct service of my family. That time for me was a murky period of guilt, sleep deprivation and postnatal depression. But when I look back on it, I can see that the guilt was damaging and entirely unnecessary. So I hope that by talking about it, it may prevent others from allowing it to creep into their lives too. So I heard and read all the stuff saying how you need to think about your own needs and wishes and factor those into your daily life too, for the sake of everyone around you, and I nodded along, but I don't think I really internalised it until much later. But now I can see that it is completely true. You have to carve out time to do the things that bring you joy. For me, that's usually sewing, but it could be anything. I also believe that by maintaining and finding time for your passion, you're caring for your mental health, which sets an important example for your kids as they grow up. This is the time of life when so many of our efforts are almost immediately undone. Cooked food gets eaten or thrown on the floor, clean laundry turns into dirty laundry, a tidy room becomes a bomb site, all in the matter of minutes. So the ability to work on a sewing project that comes together and stays together is a precious gift that we can and should give ourselves whenever possible to counteract the rest of it. The second time round, after having my son, despite suddenly doubling the number of tiny people I had to deal with, I definitely had a bit more balance. After the first few intense months, I was much better at finding time to sew, and my mental health, although still not great, remained on a more even keel by and large. If you're currently in that situation of feeling parental guilt or employee guilt or any other kind of guilt there may be, and that has resulted in you deprioritising yourself to the point where your passions have effectively been suspended, please think it over and hopefully you'll realise that it's not doing anyone in your life any favours. You really do deserve some time and headspace for yourself. In fact, you absolutely need it. So how? How on earth can you find the time, let alone the energy, to sew as a parent, particularly when your kid or kids are little? I guess my first point goes back to priorities. You need to push sewing, or whatever it is, up the priority list. When your kids are really tiny, yes, sewing will be at the bottom of the list of priorities. You're just in survival mode at that point. But after those first few months, it needs to be bumped up a bit. If it remains at the bottom, it will never happen. If it helps to think of it in these terms, your whole family needs you to bump your creative outlet up the priority list a bit. Obviously, the children's immediate needs need to be met. Then your own needs and your partner's, if you have one, those immediate needs need to be met, of course, such as eating and showering and so forth. But you can't wait until your home is back in one complete piece, that all your emails have been answered, you've caught up with all the laundry, or whatever the particular distribution of tasks in your home requires of you, before you find some time to sit down and sew. Because that list will never be complete, or if by some miracle it is completed, you'll be too exhausted. Maybe not every day, but sometimes you have to put sewing right up there on your list, just below meeting everyone's immediate needs. Absolutely above the washing up or laundry or whatever the tasks on your particular list are. Remember, not everyone will know about your list or what the priorities on it are for that day. So if someone in your home sees you prioritising sewing over something else and makes a negative comment, you must absolutely stand your ground and defend its priority. Explain that it is an act of essential self-care. If you're parenting alongside a partner, you absolutely need to help them understand how and why getting some sewing time is really important. I think that the next point to make is that your sewing life will look very different to how it did before you became a parent. That may sound obvious, and apologies if it sounds a bit patronising, but I think that it's really worth spelling out. Your spare time and reserves of energy will have taken a major hit, and possibly also the physical space and the finances available for sewing compared to the before times. Most likely the 5-hour sewing sessions on the weekend are gone. Similarly, you probably won't be able to start and finish the same project in one session if you used to do that before becoming a parent. I found success in aiming for just 15 minutes of sewing. If I could get 15 minutes done, that's usually about one step of a garment project, then I could see some progress was happening. If I could find the time and energy for more than 15 minutes, then that felt like a particularly epic session. I would then think about my sewing project between actual sewing sessions whilst doing other tasks like the washing up or when stuck under a sleeping baby, so that when I got back to the project I knew exactly what I had to do next so I could make that 15 minutes or so really count. If you live with another adult, a partner in particular, you need to get them on board with helping you ring-fence small chunks of time to sew. You can try to claim even smaller snippets of time for pushing your project forward, like winding your bobbin if you're passing your sewing machine, or pinning a sleeve into the armhole whilst waiting for potatoes to boil or something. So the irony is that I prepared this episode around collecting my son from school, collecting my daughter from football, cooking risotto, and doing the washing up twice. It's amazing what you can do when you let go of the idea that you need hours in a row to achieve anything. If you previously had a sewing space, it may have disappeared or be out of action for now. For example, my son's cot was in our bedroom for his first year. My little sewing area was also in that room, so I started keeping my sewing machine in the lounge, plus kept my sewing project in a bag. I developed the habit of taking the bag and any necessary equipment out of our bedroom before putting him down, so that I could have a little sewing session in the evenings when the kids were in bed. A friend of mine managed to make a little sewing area for herself on her landing when her son was small, so that her sewing machine was away from where he took his naps. It's not always ideal, but waiting for ideal means that you probably won't get any sewing done at all, and things will most likely look different again for you in a few months anyway, so you can rejig things again. Physical and mental exhaustion is probably the biggest barrier to sewing in the early months and years. So you need to be kind to yourself and figure out when it's worth pushing through the tiredness to get the benefits from doing some sewing, and when it's best just to veg out on the sofa or get an early night. If you're into garment sewing, occasionally there will of course be tasks that can be done on the sofa, like pinning and hand stitching. But unless you're embracing garment sewing entirely by hand, those sofa-based activities are often fairly few and far between. In that case, maybe it could be good to have another kind of garment sewing adjacent type project to have alongside your garment sewing project, like embroidery or crochet, or something completely unrelated. Something that can be done entirely on the sofa might be good for when energy levels are particularly low, but you still want to feel creative and productive. So in this vein, when you're feeling too tired to sit at your machine, maybe you could get some sewing-related joy by expanding your definition of what sewing is to include other ways of engaging with sewing other than actually doing it. So for example, you could rebrand researching and preparing for future projects as sewing. This might involve using Pinterest or Instagram on your phone or laptop. You could hunt for ideas of what to do with some fabric in your stash, or see what other people made using a pattern that you own or you're interested in. You could read through the instructions of a sewing pattern that you're currently working on or that you're planning to use soon. You can read sewing magazines, blog posts, and of course, find or catch up on sewing podcasts. This may sound a bit silly, but a slight shift in mindset around these activities may help you realise that you are actively engaging in your passion rather than feeling frustration because you perceive that you're not sewing. And remember, the sewing community is there for you. In general, being a parent of young children can be incredibly lonely and isolating, even though you're rarely actually alone, let alone parenting during a pandemic with various lockdowns and restrictions on top. You could join various sewing groups on Facebook, you could join Instagram if you haven't already, commenting on forums and blogs. There are many ways of engaging with other sewers. Seeking inspiration and connection when your kids are asleep or otherwise engaged may help you get through some tricky days. It definitely helped me. So what should you be sewing when you're the parent of a young child or children? Absolutely whatever is going to bring you the most pleasure, of course. If that's something really involved and complicated, then fine. But remember to factor in tiredness. Please be kind to yourself. I would urge you to consider projects that aren't too challenging at this time. If you want to make things for your kids, you do that, then bask in the immense joy of seeing your child wearing something that you made. If you want to exclusively make things for yourself, then absolutely do that. It's entirely up to you, of course, but I would definitely recommend that you angle any garment projects for yourself towards things that you can wear for your current lifestyle. And if you are a parent that was recently pregnant and you want to make yourself a garment, please make it for the body that you have as it stands today. It may feel like a good plan to turn to a tried and tested pattern or project because you won't have to think too hard as you make it, but if you've been pregnant, there's every chance that your body has changed somewhat and it's incredibly unlikely that it's going to go back to the shape it was before. And please don't make things for the body that you predict you'll have in a few months' time or this time next year. It's very likely that you'll be able to adjust a garment to be a little bit smaller if necessary, but don't do yourself out of the joy that you could be having by wearing your awesome self-made garment in the meantime by not making it for the body you have today. And whether you are a parent who was pregnant or not, think about comfort for the garments you now make. Think about things that can be chucked in the wash regularly and won't need ironing on the other side before you can wear it again. It's a cliche to mention knits and jersey fabrics, but I'm going to mention knits and jersey fabrics, or boxy shapes or garments with elasticated waists that are super comfy and require little fitting. Honestly though, obviously and absolutely make what you want to make, but please be kind to yourself, your body and your headspace. So that's what I've got on the topic. If you have any ideas to add about keeping your sewing life active when presented with the challenges of parenting or anything else, please do email me, send me a message or leave a comment. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!